simple silicosis doesn't mean they're severely disabled, but it does mean they're developing worse disease in time. Finding a way to engineer that worker out of that workplace and ensuring or improving the conditions on the ground to allow that worker to continue to work in those areas.
Let me introduce you to my guest, someone who fights for the little guy, fights for what's right, and will never give up the fight, the personable and professional Jonathan Walsh.
You can't lose that fire in your belly to help them, to help that individual, because it's their life, their case, their issue, so you've got to keep fighting.
As a principal lawyer with Maurice Blackburn, with a strong sense of social justice and someone who just doesn't stand in a courtroom but fights wherever and whenever he can for the cause.
The biggest criticism I get within the profession, people saying, oh, you're just doing it to business development or getting new clients. I see that as a natural consequence of who I am as a person, what I want to do and the causes I want to take up on behalf of the firm. And the day I feel uncomfortable or inauthentic in what I do is the day I stop.
Jonathan, welcome to Share.
Thanks, mate.
It's exciting to have you kind of on an episode to talk about everything we're going to dive into today.
No, it's an absolute pleasure to be here, mate. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I did a post recently calling out for some themes and who people would like to hear from and what themes they'd want me to talk about. And funnily enough, I didn't hear any feedback that people wanted to hear from a lawyer, and some of the themes and subjects we're going to talk about today didn't come through my email or my messages either, but they're very important messages and obviously very dear to you, I know, and people that I know. Obviously, as I say on this podcast, sometimes some of the topics aren't sexy, but they're definitely topics that need to be out there and more awareness needs to be kind of, spread to help others going through some of the challenges that are out there.
Yeah, indeed. You're a brave man, and I'm really happy to chat with you.
Yeah, awesome. Now, we connected obviously through Matt Britton, Trail to Triumph, and, obviously we'll dig into that a little bit more. But can I start by asking, who is Jonathan Walsh?
Yeah, that's a loaded question, mate. But well, I'm a lawyer at Maurice Blackburn Lawyers, and so I do dust diseases claims. I head up our teams in Queensland, New South Wales, Northern Territory, and have been doing this type of work for almost 2 decades now, believe it or not. Despite my youthful looks, I've been around the game for a while now. So that's me in terms of my profession, but I'm also a father of 2 girls, 2 beautiful girls who are 11 and one's almost 6 now, and going through the challenges of being a dad to 2 very energetic, outspoken girls. So it's a nice little challenge.
Yeah, awesome. And where did you grow up, John?
I grew up on the central coast of New South Wales. So it's an area between Sydney and Newcastle. Quaint little beachside suburb. And the goal was always, it was a great place to grow up. I got my love of fishing and everything water sports based out of there, which is beautiful. And I try and do as much of that as I can these days. But eventually left the home to go to uni when I finished high school and made my way into Sydney, and I was there for many years before moving north to Queensland. So, I'm wearing the blue shirt really just by chance, mate, but they are my true colours at the end of the day, sadly.
Yep. Brilliant. Awesome. So tell me, growing up, was there ever that feeling of, I'm going to get into law, or was there something else that kind of tickled your fancy?
That's a really good question because I'm the youngest of 5. And so my dad was a martial arts instructor. My mum was a registered nurse. And so we didn't really have, at least from them, any pressure to do anything from a tertiary education point of view. Just grow up, be happy, be close to your family were really only guidelines and requirements for my folks. But initially, I think I just gravitated towards being good at writing. And so I hated maths, so I wasn't getting to do science-based or anything of that nature. And I followed all my brothers and sisters, all my elder siblings, all 4 of them all did law as well. And so I just thought, that's a good idea. It's a good start in life. And that was sort of in early high school. But as I got towards year 12 and really had to focus on what I wanted to do, law seemed like really something I'd like to do and get into. I didn't quite know what or where I wanted to work and how I'd utilize that, but it's something that I wanted to at least start with. And that's kind of, where it sort of snowballed from there.
Yeah, perfect. And talk to me about obviously you didn't kind of know what kind of law or what kind of path you wanted to go down to, but was there a kind of a turning point that you just went, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, it was, because I think my elder of my two sisters, she was formerly at Maurice Blackburn Lawyers, so she specialised in medical negligence. She became a nurse like my mum, but didn't think nursing was quite for her, and she went to law a bit later in life. And I think just listening to her, to be honest, about the stories of the clients she had to represent, from the terrible birth trauma, the effects on the parents and all the associated issues with that from a financial and economic point of view, and the work that she was doing, what she tried to do, and really uncovered, quite egregious medical practice on occasions that led to these, horrendous injuries. I really thought you're doing something good. You're doing something for real people, for individuals. And I think it was mainly that driver and those stories she would tell me when she came back from work that really piqued my interest. My older brother, he did sort of employment law, working for employees initially before he went to Canberra to be a government lawyer. And that was, well, don't tell him, but it was just too boring for my liking. So that definitely did not interest me. But her stories were really rung true. And so when I got into law, doing my law degree, I was able to snag a sort of a little paralegal role with Maurice Blackburn in Sydney, and that just really cemented what I wanted to do. And so it kind of, again, just sort of snowballed from there, listening to those stories, helping real people, and it really just rung true for me. I think as well, John Grisham's got a bit to do with it, because the movie A Civil Action, it had John Travolta in it, so let's put that aside for a moment. But he was a guy, small town PI lawyer, who uncovered these egregious issues in his hometown around the local tannery affecting the waterways, and that leading to a cancer cluster in his little hometown. And he brought an action against the chemical company. So it was very much like a Dow Chemicals type storyline from the 80s and 90s. And that was like, oh, wow, like, real people can do that. Well, that sounds great for me. So that's, again, just sort of added to that accumulation of different ideas and feelings about what I wanted to do. I kind of just sort of stepped through from there.
Yeah. So are all your siblings, are you all in law?
Yeah, we all trained lawyers, all worked as lawyers at some point. Not all of them are in law right now, but we were all at one point, we're all working and practicing as lawyers, yes.
Yeah, wow. Interesting family Christmas catch-ups.
Yeah, everyone always says that, but we're the most, we're argumentative, but not about the law. We couldn't give a shit about talking law over Christmas dinner or lunch. We'll talk about other things, but the way we argue, of course, is a bit more reasoned, and we don't tend to concede ground. So the arguments take a long time to resolve, but we don't often talk about the law because we talk about it too much in our jobs.
Yeah, perfect. And obviously you've been with Maurice Blackburn for a fair while now. Obviously you started there and then you kind of came back. Was there a reason Maurice Blackburn was kind of where you've called home now?
Yeah, it was, because, as you say, I started as a junior lawyer at Maurice Blackburn in Sydney, and then I wasn't able to pursue dust diseases, which I really enjoyed as much as I would have liked at that point in the firm's history, based out of Sydney. And so I actually went off and did a few other things. I went across to a big, huge commercial law firm at the time. It was known as Blake Dawson. I think it's today known as Ashurst. And I just tried my hand at doing other things. Honestly, at that point in my career, I was wondering what I wanted to do. And I wanted to try a few things to try and figure it out, what my passions were, because I wasn't able to do precisely what I wanted to do at MB at the time. So that I'll try a few things out and come back, or figure it out. But as it turns out, it was really fortuitous that there was an opportunity to return to the firm in 2011, and that was wonderful. It's like an aligning of the stars, and the universe came together that I could do that. And so since then, it's been a really wonderful journey to really be able to dedicate myself to doing this type of work in dust diseases, and then eventually move to Queensland in 2015 to take up and lead and grow our practice in this state, and that's been going really well since then. So, yeah, the firm itself, though, it really it spoke to me because of its expressed core values around fairness and tenacity, and those two things drive really deep for me in terms of value. It's like the sense of injustice and unfairness that I always observed growing up is such a deep part of me and who I am as a person. Because I come from a mixed race background. My mum's Korean, my father's Australian. And at this point in, Australian history, like many people who were similar to me, racism was a very large part of my upbringing. It was something that was I had to endure along with my siblings, in school and things of that nature. And so always a sense of it being just so unfair because I couldn't change who I was. I am who I am, but I was being judged, mocked, and attempted to be humiliated because of how I looked or who my mum was. And so that sense of unfairness was something that I always wanted to rally against and fight against. And then, tenacity is another sort of expressed value of the firm, and sort of going after the big guys, going up and going into bat for the individual, for the little guy who doesn't have the finances like the big firms and big companies do, but needs someone to step up for them, to take a chance, take a risk, really go to war. That also runs through really true for me as well. And that's those two combined sort of feelings, those values, those elements were always there at the firm. And eventually, as I figured it out, I wanted to navigate my way back to doing this type of work for these types of clients. And when that opportunity arose, I sort of obviously took it with both hands, and I've run with it since then. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm guessing the type of work that you do, you could be in a certain firm and they probably wouldn't support what you're doing, right? So it's really, I suppose, important for you to have been in an environment and in a firm that are actually doing that day in, day out and fighting for the little guy, and really kind of backing them and really focusing on what impact they kind of can have, to people's lives.
100%. Yeah, and it's like I often speak about it that I'm so grateful to Maurice Blackburn for giving me the opportunity, the platform to act for the clients that I do. And then beyond the individual client work is to do the advocacy around law reform, and, supporting unbelievably great organisations like Trail to Triumph through Britain. The firm gives me the opportunity to do that, to live out my values through my work, and I get paid to do it at the same time, which is really wonderful. So it is true. And most firms, whilst they strive, and again, most employers strive to try and marry the two together, to have employees who are invested in the values and the work that they do because it matches the individual. The firm, at least for me, does that. And that's why it feels like home. It always has. And it's always good to, when you've got the backing of a huge place like Maurice Blackburn is today, you can go to war for a client or for a cause and know that you'll be backed 100%. And that gives you just a wonderful element of confidence, that they back your judgment, they back the cause, and will, at their own financial risk, back something that might be a bit 50-50, but we'll really see it through because it, at the end of the day, is the right thing to do. And not a lot of law firms in particular can say that, because one thing will predominate over the other. But at the end of the day, the firm is more interested in doing the right thing versus always, about the profit motive.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me about you from watching your journey, watching your kind of awareness and your interaction and engagement with, organisations like Trail to Triumph and your advocacy is it's interesting from a lawyer's perspective because you don't usually see too many lawyers, but obviously you're out there, you're raising the awareness, you're engaging, and not just engaging kind of just to get business, right? I can see there's a real heart for helping, whether you've attended Trail to Triumph, you are always helping them raise money, you're always there to lend a hand. And I think that's a really important, I suppose, component for me, because when I look at people, I look at kind of, are they genuine and authentic? And it's funny when there's, possibly some money and some career involved, it can be a little bit muddied, but I love your advocacy and I love how you engage and raise that awareness quite genuinely and authentically rather than, just to get some more business out of it.
Yeah, that's it. And thanks, man. I appreciate you saying that because that's what I've always tried to do, like being authentic. And my advocacy through all the social media platforms and the client work is always genuine. And, the biggest criticism I get is also within the profession, people saying, oh, you're just doing it to business development or get new clients. I see that as a natural consequence of who I am as a person, what I want to do, and the causes I want to take up on behalf of the firm for clients and for those that the firm supports, like through the union movement and things of that nature. I just think it's a natural extension of who I am. And the day I feel uncomfortable or inauthentic in what I do is the day I stop doing that type of thing. But, thankfully, everything that I do these days, whether it be for Trail to Triumph or other organisations at that level, it's always at its core. I can feel it in my heart. I feel as though this is the right thing to do. This is the cause to take up, and this is the message that people need to hear. Sometimes not what they want to hear, but they need to hear because it's the right thing to pursue. So yeah, if I ever come across as inauthentic, mate, just let me know, because I don't ever want to be inauthentic in that sense.
Yeah, no, all good. Now, talking about workplace relations and industrial law,
yeah,
can you talk about some of the real issues pressing, or I suppose employees and workplaces are facing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the dust diseases space, it's a really interesting time in Australian history, and particularly Australian legal history. So the problem of particularly silica-related disease is just exploding. It is true that as a community, as a government, as a health sector, these issues weren't examined probably adequately enough in the past. But now that the lens has been turned onto them, that workers are getting screened appropriately, those more high-risk workers are being identified as having disease, and then the issues that flow from that. So there's a greater focus on it, which is wonderful. But it's also presented this huge issue that a large proportion of the workplace, the workforce, particularly mining, tunnelling, construction in particular, just have hideous high amounts of silica-related lung disease in particular. And so you got to examine firstly, well, yeah, they got disease, but why is this happening? And when you peel back a very thin surface layer, you'll see that, many workplaces aren't treating the issue of dust exposure as a significant risk to their workforce, or they're just not dealing with it at all. And that's why you're seeing such disease. And so the challenge from a occupational health and safety point of view is to get employers to understand the high-risk nature of what they do, get employers to adopt and force them, cajole them, require them to ensure that their system of work is adequate enough to ward against and mitigate against the risk that they're putting their workforce in and making them face day in and day out. And then the third element, of course, is ensuring that the employee workforce is culturally adept and understands what the risks are, so that when their employer designs a system of work, that they obviously then adopt and do everything reasonable to abide by that. And so in terms of where the law is at, the law right now doesn't treat those high-risk silica workplaces in a way that it should, so far as setting the minimum standard of exposure and ensuring and making sure employers comply with that minimum standard by various means and methods. And so right now, post the ban on engineered stone from 1 July of this year, which was a wonderful sort of result of all the advocacy over the past couple of years, the focus is now on every other workplace which is high risk: mining, road and rail tunnelling, quarrying, construction, of which there are literally thousands and thousands of workplaces. So the challenge is much more significant right now, and the challenge is all ahead of us, and it's going to be a long road, but a road that definitely myself and the firm is committed to seeing through, and working with the Australian Workers Union and other unions who are representing those very same members of those workforces, because this change is very necessary. You just can't simply see the levels of industrial disease from silica exposure keep repeating for the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years in Australia. That would be a hideous outcome. So we've got to do something now. Otherwise, what are we in the game for? What are we doing this for not trying to create a safer workplace, try and do something positive for people?
Mm. So for those listening, and I know for me, prior to meeting, Matt and his dad, one of the key things I suppose everyone would know, if we think dust diseases, we would think James Hardie. Everyone would know that. It's so synonymous, I suppose, with the issue around dust diseases and class actions. And I think it was it 2009, I think, that kind of came to a head?
Yeah, it was a little bit early. So 2004, they had the big James Hardie, they call the Jackson Inquiry, where Hardie's tried to go offshore and indicate to the marketplace, at least in Australia, that they had fully funded all their future asbestos liabilities. So whereas Hardie said, 264 million, that should be enough, it was actually into the billions. And so they were very, very underfunded, and that's when that issue really blew up. And thankfully it did, because Hardie's would have gotten away scot-free effectively and been much like, which is a real sad situation in the US and the UK, where the product manufacturers from the asbestos industry have all gone deregistered and defunct because the liabilities against them for the asbestos injuries basically put them out of business, and therefore all the future victims can't claim compensation from them. So we're able to address that in Australia through a very concerted effort in 2004, a massive campaign led by the famous Bernie Benn, and on behalf of via the Australian Council of Trade Unions, on behalf of the union movement, really went in hard and justifiably and correctly to make sure that Hardie's didn't do what they wanted to do, but had to commit to a level of funding, which today makes the fund, the compensation fund sitting behind the James Hardie companies, fully funded, and asbestos victims today are still getting fully compensated, which is a wonderful outcome from that advocacy from 20 years ago, and hopefully that still continues well into the future. So
tell me, Jonathan, why then, are we still having this debate around dust diseases and, shouldn't we have learned?
100%, Steve. Is the most confounding question when you look at, if you just take one step back and look at the industrial landscape of Australia. Why can't we learn the lessons from one era or one industry or one company and apply the learnings across the board? It's like institutional amnesia around it. And I think, that's why I often indicate from a governmental regulatory point of view, there's not enough, there's not enough long-term planning around these issues about how it might apply to the future. And we just see history repeating itself, and it's just so tragic. And so one sort of case in point, so we got the engineered stone ban 1 July, but then the conversation should now be, indeed it should have been before 1 July, and it kind of was, but post 1 July, well, what are the replacement products? What are we now seeing in the Bunnings and the Mitre 10s, and what is Metricon putting into their massive home unit developments as a replacement? Is that product indeed safe? Where's the scrutiny around the replacement? Because if we do nothing and just allow it to occur, in 10 or 20 years' time, we'll see a repeat if these products are indeed unsafe or the work practices don't match the risk inherent in the products. And so you look at it, porcelain is now the big replacement. Porcelain still has up to 30% crystalline silica in it. I mean, what are the warnings around it? What are the safe work practices suggested? Do employees know about it? Do companies know about it? Are we seeing just another repeat? And so one hopes that it doesn't keep happening, Steve. But I mean, if history is a good indicator of future performance, the workers of this world are going to cop it again, the next generation, if we don't learn from our mistakes in the past.
Yeah. So obviously you talk about legislation and changes that have happened. Talk to me about what you'd like to see in the future around dust diseases and how they're handled by organisations, governments, and obviously some of these safeguards that are put in place to help team members and employees really kind of, look after their health and focus on their futures.
Yep. That's a multifaceted in terms of what should be in place. And if we want a greenfield and go to a aspirational ideal land, it's got to start with sufficient and reasonable information around the absolute extreme risks of being exposed to the various toxic dusts in the workplace, identifying where the exposures occurred, and informing both employers, companies, employees and contractors about those extreme risks, and making sure that information is up to date. It's continual reinforcement of those issues, because people can forget, people can stop listening. We spoke about asbestos before. People sometimes just are sick of hearing the asbestos information and story, and sometimes they do switch off. And that's why today, no doubt, even in Brisbane, we're going to have a worker being exposed to asbestos in some form or fashion where they really shouldn't be because of that. So the information and awareness about extreme risk has to be up to date. It has to be continual. And then based on the particular workplace, the system around the maximum exposure limits really does need to be looked at. And the argument oftentimes with industries that, we can't measure it and it's too hard to implement. Well, okay, let's really drill down into that, because, the profits from coal mining, the profits from metalliferous mining, the profits from road tunneling are just huge. There is more than sufficient capital to reinvest into proper research and development to understand the risks, and then design specific engineering controls to absolutely reduce the risk of exposure. And then also, added on top of that, make sure the individual, via their own personal protective equipment, their PPE, is adequate and up to scratch to meet that risk. And I think the rhetoric in the community these days, and it's driven by the big employers, it's driven by the big contracting companies, is to say that, workers aren't wearing their masks, so they're to blame. It's the most shameless, in my view, victim blaming in a corporate sense that keeps being peddled out. You just can't keep blaming workers for not wearing their mask. If the employer's designing the system of work, if the employer's there to ensure that employees can comply with the system of work, it's on the employer to ensure that that employee, that individual, is aware of the dangers and actually wears their mask. And if something goes wrong in that system, justifiably and reasonably, the employer is to blame for that. So you just can't turn around and keep blaming employees and contractors all the time. It's not always their fault, not at all. And then I think the third element, if you look at information awareness properly, and then ensuring that the regulations force employers and companies to implement the correct system of work by engineering controls and PPE. The third element is to ensure that the regulators are properly resourced to make the employers and contractors, in that sense, comply with the law. That is, enforce the law through prosecutions and through SNAP inspections on sites, and to all those things which seem idealistic in today's terms, but really are just forms part of what a regulator should be properly resourced to do, and what they always ask for but never get, is to make sure that those regulators have the resources and can actually move forward with regulatory compliance and call out those bad employers and those bad actors in the construction industry, for example, and bring work-safe prosecutions for those really egregious examples. And, you often talk about the influence of government, the influence of elections, the influence of how various political parties are funded. This is where you see the rubber hit the road, where you see regulators, safe work regulators, underfunded perennially, because they know that if they are funded adequately, they'll call out the very same companies who may be contributing to the major parties, for example, and those parties might be in government at that point in time. So it's all sort of, the answer is very difficult, but in terms of the broad areas of how we should go about tackling it, they're the three areas, in my view, Steve, that we should be trying to focus in on to try and address this problem for the long term.
Mm. And tell me, Jonathan, are there audits happening? Is there spot checks happening out there in the marketplace?
Yeah, it's another good question. It depends on. So my answer would be: it depends on the industry and the workplace and the employer. So, for example, in the stonemasonry context, the spot checks, particularly in Queensland and New South Wales, are vastly improved on what it was previously, especially since the ban on engineered stone. We understand that the safe work regulators have a bit better resource these days to go off and check on those employers who've already been flagged in a previous review and making sure that they're reducing dust limits and putting in those engineering controls. So that is definitely a great, really good thing. But if you contrast that to, say, metalliferous mining, so you're talking gold, copper, zinc, lead, so central, northwest of Queensland, western New South Wales, and all of Western Australia, you see very patchy resources and abilities for the regulators to go in and check those particular workplaces. And you see oftentimes still hear examples in a road tunnel or a big metalliferous mine where the regulator has to let the employer know on the ground they're coming in 2 days' time. They go, great. So the employer will turn around and say, well, let's isolate this shaft in terms of the inspection. We'll shut down the plant and equipment. Everything's under maintenance for the next couple of days. and then they send the inspectors in there to do their tests. And that sounds outrageous, right? But that still happens today and will still happen going forward if the laws aren't improved around that and giving the regulators the ability to do the snap spot inspection without warning, and giving them the ability to do that and follow up via an enforcement action of some kind. So it does vary significantly depending on the industry at the moment, Steve.
Before we get back into the episode, from time to time you might have a burning question, a guest recommendation, a comment or some feedback, which I always appreciate. If so, I'd love to continue the conversation after this episode, so let's connect. I'm easy to find, but the best place to engage and connect is on Instagram, @TheSteveHodgson. But that's enough from me. Let's get back into the episode. And I'm thinking, obviously, there's definitely a responsibility from the employer and from the government and from the regulatory bodies that are out there to kind of enforce this. But there's obviously a personal responsibility that employees have to take and team members need to take. But I can also imagine that, in some of these industries we're talking about, job security is a big thing, right? And, it's, cost of living and everything like that. So people are like, well, I know the effects of this, but I've got to earn money. I don't want to lose my job. I may be getting paid good money, but they are worried about kind of, I suppose, speaking up and maybe leaving a workplace that isn't particularly safe.
100%. Yeah, it's a massive pressure on the individual, the employee or contractor, and particularly in the contractor sense where they can be, given work at a day's notice and let go on a day's notice. Their contracts suddenly could just evaporate in the air. And, the bigger contracting companies, employees know this too. And no doubt, without a shadow of a doubt, they use that and utilize that as an unspoken pressure to ensure that, the health and safety issues on the ground aren't spoken out about or aren't being alerted to the regulators of each state and territory. 100%. If you take the road tunneling industry as an example, a road header operator can earn significant amount of money on these big road tunneling projects in Sydney or Brisbane, upwards of $250,000. And you don't need to have an apprenticeship. You don't need to have a tertiary education degree. You can be simply trained on the job. They are highly skilled technicians and plant operators, don't get me wrong at all. But they don't have the qualifications to back that up other than their tickets and ability to get the job done. And so many examples of clients from that industry that I now have to act for. It was very much a case of, we know this is wrong. We know the dust is just huge. The system of ventilation within the tunnel or road tunnel was just so inadequate. But they also had a mortgage. They also have kids, and they have to think about what their priority is in terms of their job on that day. And if they know that their employer lets other employees go at a drop of a hat for any reason, any compliance reasons, that's a very compelling reason for them to stay quiet, to actually think about their kids and their wife at home and saying, well, that's my priority. So I just got to stick my head down and keep doing what I'm doing. And you see the tragic results of it. So shining a light on those cultural issues on the ground by empowering regulators, by ensuring that the information is supplied to the employer and the employees on the ground, and improving the engineering controls by legislation and regulation is one way to try and address that cultural problem. Because that is just huge, Steve, and that's the big unspoken thing. And that's why you get these, what would otherwise be, if you walk into one of these work sites and you see the thick level of visible dust and the dust control machine, the scrubbers that they call them, these road tunnels, not sucking in any dust, then you think there's a lot of things wrong with this picture, but why isn't anyone talking about it? Well, that is one of the reasons why people aren't.
Yeah. So for those that have obviously worked within these industries, is it something that they start experiencing symptoms and issues early on, or is it something that can go decades and then rear its head?
Yeah, so again, depends on the industry. So if you look at stonemasons, they have a very particular form of silicosis called accelerated silicosis. So that's silicosis which arises within 2 or 3 years. And generally with any type of lung disease, it's first able to be recognised radiologically, so on a CT scan, but the particular individual might not necessarily have symptoms. When you have symptoms and also the radiology to back it up, then you're in for a world of hurt generally. But these days, with the improving level of examination of workers, they're often getting picked up with very low levels of disability, of lung function impairment, and the simple forms of the disease. So for silicosis, for example, simple silicosis is the chronic form. It often doesn't mean they're severely disabled, but it does mean they are at extreme risk of developing worse disease in time. So oftentimes the focus now is, as it should be, is to detect early signs of disease and mitigate against that, either finding a way to engineer that worker out of that workplace and find them replacement work where they're not exposed to dust anymore, or otherwise ensuring or improving the conditions on the ground to allow that worker to continue to work in those areas. So not everyone who develops these types of lung diseases has very severe forms of disability. Some go on to, absolutely, but a good majority of them don't. But that doesn't mean to say that they're still not affected by the disease, because once you are diagnosed, say for simple silicosis, and you're a metalliferous minor, then the employer is then made aware of that diagnosis, identifies that individual as a risk to the business, and will find a way not to employ them going ahead, or say that we can't supply you with safe work, therefore, sorry, mate, you're done, make you redundant and get you to move on. So that's the real impact on a lot of these workers with low disability and simple forms of the disease. In their 30s and 40s, they develop the condition, they've got their financial commitments to match their income, and all of a sudden they can't do that work where they otherwise feel generally okay for, but they're prevented from working. And that takes a huge toll on them. And that's why, as a secondary effect, you see such bad secondary psychological injuries develop in these workers as a result of their diagnosis. They work to provide for their family. They work because they can. They oftentimes enjoy their jobs. But when that's denied of them, they get completely lost. And so that's the bigger epidemic amongst this workforce with disease is the mental health effects on them, which can often be extreme and far more disabling than the actual lung disease itself.
So talk to me about then, if someone, is everyone that is affected by silicosis or any dust diseases, are they entitled to compensation? Are they entitled to, obviously if their health is affected, if they've got some level of disability, how's that worked out?
Yeah, absolutely. So in general, if you are diagnosed with a lung dust disease, then you are entitled to pursue compensation. Generally speaking, in most states and territories, except for the territory, workers have a two-part system. They can pursue initially workers' compensation in their relevant state, and then oftentimes be able to pursue what they call a common law claim for damages or a damages claim. So the workers' compensation is in every state and territory except for the Northern Territory, not a lifetime scheme. It's not meant to be there forever, and it often never is. It's designed to help that worker deal with their injury, then transition out of that job that caused that injury, but otherwise not to provide a complete replacement income or expenses, medical expenses for life, things of that nature. So oftentimes that's the first step in the process for a worker affected by disease, to simply get, a workers' comp claim accepted, to get lost wages replacement for a period of time and get medicals covered. But then they're left to, well, what are the long-term effects? What are the long-term effects on the ability to continue to work in any comparable industry or job which paid them the same as their prior job which caused their injury? How will they be compensated if they are unlucky enough to deteriorate in their health over a long period of time? How is that measured? How are they compensated for that? And that's where the common law damages claim comes in. That's where most workers do pursue those actions in those states where they can, because the impact for the long term can be profound. If they've got a shortened life expectancy at the back end by 5 or 10 years, that's significant. If they've got mildly progressive disease and they're 40, but by the time they're 60, they're going to have moderate to severe disease, then that's a very big problem that they need to try and account for into the future. And most workers' compensation schemes are not going to be there in 25 years' time when this worker is really bad. So the common law damages is there to design to compensate them for the future progression of disease, the future impact of their disease as best as it can be judged today, what their needs will be and be compensated because of it.
So talk to me about some of the barriers that kind of current employees or former employees that are maybe having some of these health kind of issues and problems, from asbestos, from silica, those kind of things. What are some of the barriers that they're coming up against that they may prevent them from kind of, seeking compensation or reaching out for help?
Yeah, I think there's a few barriers that often exist, and some of them are myths. So one of them is around the fact that your employer will look after them. And this often occurs in small industries and smaller workplaces. And we often saw that trend in stonemasons, where a lot of them were 2 or 3 man businesses who were installing companies. And when they got injured or sick, or their doctor told them, hey, it's to do with, cutting stone, they would tell their employer because they were fearful of losing their job. And the employer would say, oh, hey, no, don't lodge a claim. We'll look after you, pay for your medicals. And that's often a very large misdirection, a very sad one. When you get to the bigger employments, the bigger industries, it's very much a case, well, what do I do now? It's almost a stigma or a fear for a lot of these workers to say that they are affected by disease. And then often, from a male point of view, not strong enough to withstand it or deal with it. And therefore, they just shut up about it, stick their head in the figurative and literal sand and keep moving forward because they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about the effects into the future. And the other one is around a fear around a legal process itself. And often my job, particularly in initial client conferences and speaking with community groups and things of that nature, is to try and break down and simplify the legal process. While some of the medical and scientific issues can be complex at the back end, at the initial phase, it really shouldn't be a process to fear for workers. They shouldn't. And it's something that they need to embrace because it's the system's designed to ensure that they get compensated if they are affected by the disease. And the other one is, and it's a lingering one, is around, all lawyers like me, your ambulance chasers are going to take all your money. It's just like, well, it's just not the case, The vast majority, like myself and Maurice Blackburn, we act on a no-win, no-fee basis. So there's no upfront cost to any worker who's affected by the disease. And we only get paid our reasonable costs at the end, at the conclusion of the damages claim. And at least for NB, I can very much hand on heart say that our fees are always really reasonable. So they're kind of the 4 main barriers that often workers confront or have to confront. And it's often the initial part of my conversation with them is trying to break down those barriers to ensure that they understand what actually goes on and to ensure that they get the direction they need. And I always say to clients, you can choose to instruct me or not, but my goal out of this initial discussion is to make sure that you can make a reasonable, informed decision about where you stand and what your options are going to be. Choosing a lawyer is an individual thing. If you don't like me, that's cool. I'll move on. But, make a good decision about you and your family so that you don't sort of act on myths or barriers that don't exist. That would be the worst outcome for any affected worker, in my view.
Yeah. So what's your advice for those that may be in that position that they're kind of not reaching out for help or they are experiencing health issues? What's your advice for them?
Yeah, my advice is do a couple of things. If you're concerned about your health or your exposure in the workplace, go and chat to your GP. Go and chat to your GP and talk to them about what your concerns are, where you've worked to make sure that they record that down, and then ask for the real regular tests to check for these things. And so the 2 things that I always advise a worker in this situation is ask your GP to refer you on to get a CT scan of your chest. Forget about getting a chest X-ray. It's the most archaic, rudimentary type of scanning technology from the 3 millennia ago. Just don't use it. Get a CT scan and a lung function test. So know where you stand from a health point of view. Those concerns you might have around your health can be dispelled pretty quickly by a CT scan and lung function test. So at least you know where you stand on the health side. On the potential legal side, particularly, for teams like Maurice Blackburn, it's always good to know where you stand, to find out about your legal rights, the difference between workers' comp and a damages claim, what might be available to you, what time limits might apply. You don't have to engage a lawyer, but you should do some background work just to understand where you stand. And if you need that explained to you, at least Maurice Blackburn will give you that information absolutely obligation free, because it just fulfills our purpose of making sure workers make reasonably informed decisions about their health so that they are disadvantaged because of what's happening to them at work through no fault of their own. So that's my general advice to workers. Go and chat with your GP, get a couple of tests done. And if you want to know where you stand on the legal side, the implications of your diagnosis potentially for your work and everything else, go and chat to a lawyer who specialises in the area. They can give the guidance and the confidence you need to know where you stand so that, again, you can make a good decision about what you should do.
Yeah, great advice. Now, talk to me about the importance and the impact that organisations and movements like Trail to Triumph are having on, the dust diseases and the awareness and, obviously the impact of actually getting people to reach out and people to, I suppose, feel not alone if they're going through this themselves.
Yeah, 100%. And this is, we see this a lot, particularly for men who develop these types of diseases. They are great communicators and they don't often want to share about what's happened to them. So organisations like Trail to Triumph normalise, not only spread information and awareness about the dangers and if you do develop a disease, here's some information to try and help you, but to help normalise the conversation around it all, to help those people affected and their families, their kids or their extended friendship group or their workplace, have that conversation to normalise it so that these issues can be dealt with earlier and sooner before it becomes too late. Sticking with all these old miners in particular, they'd often say, back in the 70s or 80s, I used to know old mate, he got dusted, and it's kind of like almost like a badge of honour that they got affected by their work and had to stop and die a horrible death. It was the most weirdest thing when you think about it in context. But, moving on from that era of time where you want to be able to talk about it and normalise it, the understanding of it, so that if issues are on the ground in the workplace, you can talk about them. If someone's individually affected, you can talk about it and that individual can get the help they need and that workplace can be better scrutinised to make sure that they are safer for those workers for tomorrow and every other day that everyone needs to go to work. So Trail to Triumph does a magnificent job. It punches well above its weight. If you were to see the absolutely dedicated individuals who run Trail to Triumph, they're all volunteers. They spend a lot of time spreading the message through these crazy ultra marathons and everything else. They should really be applauded day in, day out for the work that they do. And they do that because they believe in the message. They believe it's a good thing for them to do, and that's why they do it, and they should be applauded for it.
Yeah. I ran into Matt yesterday in the gym, actually, and he was telling me that this year will be the last year they do their annual run up in Murrumbarra Mackay. Yeah. And for anyone listening, obviously Matt Britton founded Trail to Triumph. Obviously, they used to donate a lot of their money to the Bernie Banton Foundation. So that obviously, from the James Hardie, that obviously had a really flow-on effect and really inspired that. And Trail to Triumph now raises money for a number of organisations, but they, put together a crazy bunch of people, Matt does, and I think they had their most amount of people that competed last year, running from Murrumbarra to Mackay over 2.5 days, 250 kilometres. And obviously Matt, was inspired to start Trail to Triumph because of his dad, Tony Britton, a great man who, an Aston Villa supporter. And I remember one night watching on my couch, and Matt used to live around the corner, and I had the absolute pleasure of having a chat with Tony and Matt while we were watching an Arsenal versus Aston Villa game. So it was great to meet the man, but just really disappointing that his life was cut short, because of mesothelioma. And, have always wanted to support Trail to Triumph, as many people in the greater Springfield region and also the Mackay and Murrumbarra regions and all over, people have got behind it. So it's an amazing thing. What are some of your experiences? I know you've been up to Mackay.
I have. I have never sort of dealt to Matt's bullying to actually do the run, but I've been, because this body ain't meant to run, I got to say, Steve. But I keep telling Matt that he doesn't seem to listen. But
good for trivia, though, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. No, I've been up there a number of years now, and we'll go back again in October this year as part of the support group. And so that's a wild ride. That first year I did it, I couldn't believe what these individuals do to themselves, their body, their mind, their soul, everything, to run that distance and that heat in those conditions. It was just extraordinary. And so I'll be back every year that Matt lets me, I think, in terms of support. You're obviously not doing the run. You work on very little sleep. Matt, he says, if you try and keep the runners alive, I think I do my best to try and contribute towards that, definitely. But you're there, you understand it a bit more. You understand the suffering that goes into it, and Matt's motivation to do it, to honour his dad appropriately in his way, and to honour all those people who have passed from mesothelioma and who will go on, sadly, to develop mesothelioma into the future. And, you got to see it, experience it to believe it, to understand it. And I hope more and more people get to do it well into the future, because it is a really amazing experience. And yeah, as you say, this is the last time for a few years. I'll be up in Moranbah and Mackay, and I'll do a different circuit at Southeast Queensland. I don't want to reveal too many more details, so I'll leave it there. But another very exciting event planned for next year, and I can't wait to see how that all sort of pans out. But fair to say, in the Matt Britton way, there'll be lots of suffering involved.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think, speaking to Matt, he was talking about he's really excited about, what they're looking at doing in Southeast Queensland, and we won't release any details, but he's very excited because he's like, we're going to be able to involve more people. We're going to be able to raise more awareness, raise more funds, and really grow the Triple T impact. And I think that's such an important thing. So I'm looking forward to getting behind that and seeing that evolve as it does over the next few years.
Yeah, 100%. I'm looking forward to what this next phase is. I mean, did the 10 years last year, and let's see what these next 10 years bring. It's going to be really fascinating. I feel really lucky. Honestly, I feel really lucky I get to do this and get to know Matt initially, and then be able to support the organisation from the awareness and do everything individually I can beyond the sponsorship dollars to promote the issue, because I believe in it. You know Matt more and more how much it means to him. I mean, that just it consolidates in my mind why I do it, and why we want to keep doing it, because this is so important.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Now, can I ask you, Jonathan, on a personal level, what, through your law career, what's been your biggest challenge, and how have you overcome it?
Ooh. Biggest challenge? There are a few. I think the initial challenge was finding my home, where what I wanted to do, and I took a bit of a journey to get there, as we sort of spoke about a bit earlier. So that was the first challenge. I think the second challenge is truly understanding more and more. And as I get older, I understand this better and better. Is you only get out of it what you put into it as well, and you can use the law for good, like I feel as though I'm doing. It's not just a job; it can be a career, it can be define who you are and be a reflection of you as a person. And to do that, most lawyers don't get that opportunity. I'm always cognizant of that. You see, lawyers as a profession has the highest rate of mental health issues of any profession, because it's very high stress, and not everyone loves what they do. But I know that I do. And the challenge was to try and understand that and pursue that with as much vigor as I could. And so that challenge, that barrier, that understanding took a while for me to get, because I always knew it was a job. I liked what I wanted to do, but I didn't know how to pull it together in a more seamless way to really express and really start to achieve. And once I understood that better, that's when the growth in the team, the clients we could act for, the good we could do in the community around advocacy, that's when that really started to click. So that I saw it from the outside. Law's there to do something good. You can do good with law, but how you get there, that little transition phase was super complex. And I had to go through a number of ups and downs to understand how you could utilize it for the better and also achieve all those things on the way. So not giving many specifics about that, Steve, but that was just a big thing for me. It's only kind of clicked in the last sort of 5-6 years that I could understand that better and do a lot of good and still achieve everything I wanted to achieve by way of client work and otherwise.
Yeah, perfect. And throughout your life, how do you define success, and how has that changed through your career and life?
Yeah. initially, before I got into law or when I was just sort of graduating, success is always, the highest paid job. There's external measures of success where you could live, the type of car you drove. But as I became more successful in law and more successful in my job and career and really focused in on what my passions were in the law and how I could use it for better, the car I got now is 10 years old and I don't care. The fact that what's important to me is how happy my girls are and whether they're thriving in their lives and understanding, how I can help them more and how they can, grow as individuals and all those things. So success for me is those things these days, as opposed to the external measures of success that any sort of young person getting into a career would understand, very in a simplified way, understand what success would be. At the end of the day, it's those other things that matter more.
Yeah, perfect. And throughout your life, who would you say has been your greatest teacher?
I'll take two. Can I have two?
You can. I'll give you two. It's all right.
Thanks, mate. The first one would definitely be my mum. My mum was such an extremely hard worker, both in her job as a nurse and as the matriarch of our family. Having 5 kids and not being, always struggling financially, it's fair to say, raising the family on the Central Coast of New South Wales. At times it really got to her, but she still stood up and was always so protective of us and wanted to give us the best that she could. That always inspired me, and she went through her own real severe battle with breast cancer in the late 90s, and it was really touch and go for her. But now she's still, in her early 80s and still commanding the room and doing everything that she wants to do in life. And that's just amazingly inspiring that a person, she was Korean heritage, she grew up in Korea, didn't know a lick of English before she started nursing, and now where she is now. And I'm really proud to sort of be her son and be a success because it's a reflection of her. But in terms of professionally, my former boss, her name's Theodora Hillis, she gave me a lot of the passion as well for working in this area of law. She was an amazing individual. Sadly, health meant that she was taken from the legal industry sooner than what she wanted. And so she couldn't do more good that I know she wanted to do. But she gave me a lot of the inspiration to fight hard for these individuals that you don't know before you go into their house for the first time. You don't know their background, but you get to know them and to fight for them because that's the right thing to do, and really fight for them, and put the firm at financial risk at times because it's still the right thing for this individual, for us to act for them in that way. So thankfully, she never gave me that very clinical, profit-driven motive of acting for clients. It was very much about Jonathan, what's the right thing to do in this situation? What should we be doing? Should we advise them to take the lower offer, or should we, prepare for a trial because we know that is the right thing to do? We know that the judge is going to agree with it, so let's just go for it. That type of thing. I'm just so grateful that was instilled in me early in my career because I carry that through to today. Because at the end of 7 years or whatever it is now, some of the cases can be very similar, but you can't lose that fire in your belly to help that individual, because it's their life, their case, their issue, and you're here to help them. So you got to keep fighting. So I'm really grateful for Theodore for teaching me and guiding me in that way, because as a reflection of that, I try and obviously stick to those values today and hopefully until I end my career.
Yeah, awesome. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are very thankful that you've had that focus and kind of had that direction that shaped you into, who you are today, because obviously I know there's a large amount of people that have been impacted and helped by you, and hopefully many more.
I hope so. Yeah, it's always good and bad. I hope to do more good in this life and this job. Hopefully I can do it for as long as I can.
Yeah. Tell me, being a lawyer, I want to ask this question.
Yeah.
Dealing with some really, I suppose, delicate and sensitive topics around dust diseases, obviously there's a lot of emotion that goes with that. How do you balance that emotion with the professional side of things when you're dealing with a client?
It's a good question. I do it far better these days than I did initially. because I didn't. And I think as a profession, and certainly as a firm, vicarious trauma is far better understood, recognised, and dealt with by way of support services. Because one of the memories, the enduring memories that rest with me is that I remember very early in my career, I went to see a client who was literally on their deathbed in the hospital, and I went with a very experienced barrister, and he'd been doing the work for about 25 years. And I remember going to that hospital room. The client had the peritoneal form of mesothelioma, so the one that affects the lining of the stomach. And you could see he's about 6'3" tall, but he was absolutely thin as a rake. But he had this huge distended stomach because the fluid kept accumulating in his abdomen because of the disease. And I remember he was in such pain, he was hanging onto these railings above his bed, and they were trying to fix a line in to give him IV morphine. So like a very confronting scene, and one that I didn't recognise what process I know at the time, but it occurred many years later. And so, that doesn't happen every day, but it happens from time to time where you see a client very, very ill. Well, so, you're having those horrific experiences by any measure, and then balancing that is to be as fit from a health point of view and a mental health point of view as you can, and having that balance through family, fitness, things of that nature. And, I've had varying levels of success with that over my career to date, but I'm getting, I think, the mix better and better these days and understanding myself better. And it's still quite a journey. But forcing yourself to take a step away from the office, turning off the phone. My great love is fishing and particularly going beach fishing. So every chance I get, I'm jumping the highlights and head up to Noosa North Shore and drive on the beach. My brother-in-law's trying to convince my girls to come with me, but they can't deal with it for more than 20 minutes these days. But fingers crossed as they get older, mate. But standing on the beach near the water, sunrise, sunset is like a great reset for me from a mental point of view. And without those moments, I don't think I'd be resilient enough to be my best self when I need to be the lawyer and I need to help these clients in these situations. So forcing yourself to have those resets, knowing what you enjoy outside of work and following those passions too, is a way I found that I can address that imbalance at times between work and life and happiness and things of that nature.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. Thanks for that. One last question. If you can cast your mind forward and you meet your 100-year-old self, what does he say to you?
Oh, man. I'll probably still be working at 100 these days. I have two girls that are very expensive. Hopefully he says that he's proud of me, that he gave it a go, and he helped people along the way. Yeah, definitely. And was a good dad at the end of the day too, obviously, as well. So, oh, mate, that's very profound. I don't know if I want to explore that any further in terms of what it means at the end of the day. I'm too busy in the now, but at the end, legacy and the good you could do in the world. Hopefully my 100-year self is in a position to say that I've contributed towards something to make it a better world. I think I'd be happy with that.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Now, for people that want to connect with you, Jono, around professionally, personally, seek some support or just seek some advice, what are the best ways for people to reach out to you?
Yeah, from the professional point of view, through the Maurice Blackburn website profile, I'm active on LinkedIn, Facebook as well. So reach out on any of those platforms. If you'd like to connect, I'd be very happy to chat about anything to try and help. And also you can reach me via Trail to Triumph too, via Matt's organisation. They're a fantastic crew there as well. So there's a few ways to get to me, but just know that if you do want to reach out, please do. I'll always have time to have a yarn.
Yeah, perfect. And as I always do, I'll put all the links down under the podcast, this podcast episode, so people can see in the show notes that all your information. I'll put all the Trail to Triumph. I know they're out already fundraising for this year as well, so I'll put the Trail to Triumph fundraising link there as well. So enjoy your time again in Murrumba and Mackay.
Thanks,
and send all my best to the team, and look forward to continuing to see Trail to Triumph kind of move forward, but also your advocacy work and your passion for social justice and kind of fighting for the little guy. I look forward to seeing your, kind of journey continue and the lives that you're impacting obviously grow.
Thanks, mate. It's been a real pleasure.
No, all good. Thanks, Jono.
Cheers.